Your boss, your team, other departments, your clients, your family, and even yourself. Different needs, wants, and expectations, it's impossible to balance all of them. Or is it? Prioritizing stakeholders is a super important yet underrated skill, but stick around and in about 15 minutes time you'll be able to prioritize your stakeholders just like a seasoned pro. Hi, my name is Raf. Welcome to RISR, where my mission is to help you go further faster. You're about to learn how to prioritize almost any group of stakeholders in almost any context. But this video is also part of a stakeholder management series, which includes this video and this video, which are linked in the playlist below, and I've also linked my How to Prioritize playlist. Both of these playlists will help you accelerate your career, so go wild. Now, also towards the end of the video, you'll learn how to pick up a free guide that I created to help you master one-on-one conversations with arguably your most important stakeholder, your boss. In previous videos, I covered all the basics, including a complete overview and how to identify stakeholders. So this video is specifically how to prioritize stakeholders once they are already known to you. And I'll be exploring three different ways to do that, as well as how to tailor each of them to your needs. I'll also reveal my personal favorite, so stay tuned. So let's begin with the Stakeholder Matrix, sometimes also called a stakeholder map. Mandelow's Stakeholder Matrix is probably the most popular stakeholder matrix, and it focuses on categorizing stakeholders based on their level of interest and their level of power, the power to influence your outcomes. It features 4 quadrants, each representing a different type of stakeholder. Number 1, high power, high interest stakeholders who are the most important because they really can make or break things and they care deeply about what you're doing. So you'll need to engage with them deeply, keep them informed at all times, and make sure that their needs and expectations are met. In practical terms, this means open and regular communication, including updates, and you really want to over-communicate with this group. It also means getting to understand and be super clear on their feedback, especially their concerns, and make sure that they are addressed in a way that is clear to them that you've taken their views on board. In the second quadrant, your high power, low interest stakeholders have the power to make or break your initiative, but don't have as much interest. It's just not as relevant or important to them, so you're not going to be engaging with them to the extent of the quadrant 1 folks. But you still need to keep them satisfied and informed enough because, as I mentioned in a previous episode, if they're not satisfied, they might become more interested, pushing themselves and other dissatisfied stakeholders who they can influence into the first quadrant, which could pose an enormous problem for you. This is the group that, in my experience, people tend not to take as seriously as they should. Also bear in mind that stakeholders with interest and power can also be an incredible force for good. So if you're able to positively influence someone with low interest but high power to become interested, then you've gained a powerful advocate. And that's a career hack that, again, so many people miss because they're so focused on the danger but not necessarily the good. So while in reality you won't need as much effort here, mainly stuff like occasional updates and reports and fewer of the really high-touch one-on-one type activities, keep a very close eye on them. And my tip, get as much feedback from them as possible, either directly or indirectly through people that report to them or know them well. How are they feeling about your work? Have they said anything positive or negative? And so on and so forth. Now, in the third quadrant, low power, high interest stakeholders are deeply interested in what you're doing, but they just don't have a lot of power. So the focus here is on communication and feedback, but in a less tailored way. So we're talking about a lot of group activities like meetings and town halls to understand their collective view. Now, you don't have to satisfy all of their individual expectations, but you still need to keep them well informed because, again, if they become unhappy, they could join with other unhappy, low-influence individuals, and guess what? That group all of a sudden gains power and influence, and then you're in trouble. And again, if you do an outstanding job, then you might find there's a coalition of low-influence individuals backing you that together are a powerful block that will advocate for you. Leaders of large groups ought to be mindful of this, and in particular, regular communication, including communicating your strategy, any wins, and individual achievements can be very powerful tools here. Now, here's a little tip. If any of these stakeholders are connected with high-power stakeholders, you might want to keep an eye on them and potentially get closer to them. Why? Because they can often act as proxies or informants for those high-power stakeholders, reporting back on what's happening. Trust me, it's real. And number 4, lastly, you have your low-power, low-interest stakeholders. In practical terms, this is a group that gets the occasional update, report, or newsletter, and not terribly much more, except to say that there may be individuals in this group that you actually want or need to become more interested. So you can think about inviting those individuals to town halls or other types of meetings to try and get them more engaged. Obviously, this is still just a summary, but should be enough for you to start using this tool in a practical way. Mandelow's Stakeholder Matrix is obviously a very visual tool that's really handy when prioritizing in a group, like a project group or your team. And just like in this example, it's typically used as a 2x2 matrix. That's 2 quadrants wide by 2 quadrants long. But I've also seen it used as a 3x3 matrix. Now, what I've just shown you is the normal version, but it's pretty easy to tailor it to fit your specific needs. For example, if you feel power and interest as the two axes are not quite nailing it for you, then just swap them out for whatever is going to fit your specific needs. For example, you can swap those interested stakeholders for those affected by your initiative, and you can also swap out power for importance in the same way. Or you can use totally different criteria, such as the value stakeholders bring versus the effort required to meet expectations, which could be useful when implementing a new system, entering a new market, or even some type of process improvement initiative. And in another version, we could have the potential for stakeholders to create risks or opportunities, which could be useful if you're doing strategic planning or working on new product introductions, for example. So, matrices provide a great visual guide, which is good for workshopping and presentations, but often not the most practical way to document and save this information. So you might end up transcribing your results into a spreadsheet at some later point. Which brings us to method 2, using a spreadsheet to prioritize your stakeholders. And here, once again, you'll need to identify your criteria, whether that's level of interest, influence, expertise, power, whatever. We've already discussed how you can shape these to your own needs, but in this case, we're not limited to just 2 dimensions. We can use as many as we like. So in this example, I've got 3. So whatever dimensions you choose, you stick them in there and rate them against those criteria. I personally like to use 0, 1, 3, and 9 scoring because it helps separate my stakeholders out more easily, which you'll see in a sec, but you could just as easily use 1 to 5, 1 to 10 scoring, or whatever you like. Now, once you've done that, then simply add up the scores in a total score column to rate each stakeholder, and then sort this column in descending order and create cutoff points to group your stakeholders into those who require most attention down to the ones requiring the least attention. And you can decide how many groups you want in there. I've got 3 in this example, but be warned that more groups means more complication and more work later. But we're not done just yet. Just like a teacher grading a test, which might have some sections that are more important than others, you might also want to score each dimension based on their relative importance to your overall objective. Because right now, our power, interest, and affected dimensions are of equal importance. In this example, I'm assigning a score or weight of 50 to the power dimension because let's say that I believe stakeholders with high power should receive more attention here. And I'm assigning a weight of 25 to the interest dimension because let's say that they're reasonably likely to impact success, much like the affected stakeholders, to which I'm assigning an equal weight of 25 points. Now, obviously, you tailor these to suit your needs. Then, in the total score column, for each stakeholder, I simply multiply each score by the dimension's weight and then add them up. So, in this example, stakeholder 1 is rated 3 for power, times its weight of 50, which equals 150, plus the rating for affected, which is 9, times its weight of 25, which is 225, plus interest, which is 1 times 25, which is 25. So the total score for that stakeholder is 150 plus 225 plus 25, which totals 400. Now, I'm not going to show you how to create the formula here to auto-calculate that for you, but using a formula like this will sum these up really nicely. Then you just sort the total score column and group them up, just like we did before, and you can now see how the weightings have given us a different, more accurate result. And by using the 0, 1, 3, 9 to rate each stakeholder, I've also helped to separate the total scores, which makes grouping them up a lot easier. You can see how it helps you separate them based on objective measures. By using dimensions and weights, we've actually created a far more advanced way of prioritizing stakeholders called a multi-criteria decision analysis, or MCDA. I know it's quite a mouthful, but the most important thing is that here our stakeholders are prioritized based on their relative importance to the outcomes which we're aiming for, which in my experience works really well. Which brings us to our third method for prioritizing stakeholders, and for this one we're going to imagine that you're a chef cooking a delicious meal for a party. You want to make sure that everyone enjoys your food, but you need to prioritize the preferences of some guests more than others. Your guest list includes the party host, guests with special dietary needs, guests who are foodies, and guests who just don't care either way. So, for all intents and purposes, these are your different stakeholder groups. Next, using some of the stakeholder engagement tools you'll learn in an upcoming episode, you'll figure out what's important to each of these 4 groups. Either way, you'll learn that the host wants the meal to be cost-effective, the guests with special dietary needs want gluten-free options, the foodies want innovative dishes with complex flavors, and the guests who just don't care as much want something simple. Then, you assess each stakeholder based on 3 factors: power, the legitimacy of their need to be involved or their needs to be addressed, and the urgency of their needs. In this instance, the host has high power and high legitimacy because they're paying for the event. The guests with special dietary needs have high legitimacy because of their health requirements. The foodies have high urgency, power, and legitimacy because they're obsessed with efficient service. They know their stuff, and they're probably posting to Instagram and TikTok in real time. And guests who would prefer pizza, well, they've got high power because they're close friends of the host. Thanks to this model, which is called the Stakeholder Salience Model, you were able to create a memorable dining experience for everyone. This type of diagram with circles that overlap or intersect, for those of you who don't already know, is called a Venn diagram, with each circle representing a group of things and the overlapping parts representing the shared characteristics between those groups. The Stakeholder Salience Model uses 3 different criteria, so you actually end up with 7 groups within the model, plus an additional group outside representing non-stakeholders. In this model, dormant, discretionary, and demanding stakeholders are just not as important as those groups that intersect, such as dominant stakeholders who have legitimacy and authority, so their needs must be well understood, and they'll need regular, tailored communication, just like the dangerous stakeholders who have high power and a high sense of urgency, which can really complicate things for you. Dependent stakeholders also need to be kept well informed and involved in decision making from time to time, but they just don't have as much power as the dominant or dangerous stakeholders to change outcomes. And there, in the middle, where they all intersect, are the definitive stakeholders, the most important group to be kept informed, satisfied, and involved. And outside of it all are the non-stakeholders. Once again, there's nothing stopping you from tailoring this model to your needs by choosing different criteria or changing the number of criteria as well. Now, for those who are familiar with this channel, you know that I love these different models because the more of them you have at your disposal, the faster and easier you'll be able to do your job. But you'll also know that I always recommend you to play around and try stuff. These models can be really useful as is, but there's absolutely nothing stopping you from changing them to fit your particular needs or creating your very own, as long as they do the job, of course. And that also includes using different models strung together in different combinations. The more you use them, the more you'll be able to play around with them, and the more you'll understand how to do this. In fact, in this stakeholder management series, I outline many different tools that are ultimately strung together in a custom combination to create an end-to-end stakeholder process. So we've just covered the top 3 ways to prioritize your stakeholders and how to tailor each of them to your specific needs. The Stakeholder Matrix, featuring Mandelow's stakeholder map. The spreadsheet method, including a more advanced multi-criteria decision analysis, and a Venn diagram method featuring the Stakeholder Salience Model. My personal favorite? Well, for me, it really depends on the scope and purpose. I'll tend to use something like a 2x2 stakeholder matrix for a group prioritization exercise, or for work of a smaller size and scope with fewer stakeholders. After all, it would be a bit crazy to use a complex stakeholder prioritization model if you only have a handful of stakeholders, just way overcomplicated for what you need. On the other hand, when it comes to larger pieces of work with lots of stakeholders, I usually end up with some sort of multi-criteria decision analysis, because for me, having the flexibility with dimensions and then weighting them is really important so that I can tailor it to get the best possible outcome. But I'm curious which one you think you might try for your next initiative. So now, if you've been following the stakeholder management series of videos, we've covered a basic overview, how to identify stakeholders, how to prioritize those stakeholders effectively, and so the next step is the final step, how to actually engage those stakeholders. So click here or wait a few seconds till the end of the video to grab that one, where I cover how to create a stakeholder engagement plan, how to create tailored stakeholder engagement strategies to reach them in the right ways, and also to evaluate your efforts so you know you've done a decent job. As I mentioned before, the most important stakeholder of all is your boss. So if you haven't done so already, grab my guide to mastering one-on-ones with your manager. You'll find a link below which will take you to my next project, RISR Business School, where you can easily grab your free copy, no strings attached. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean the world to me if you'd give it a like, and if you want to see more like this, then subscribe and press the notification bell so that you don't miss out on future episodes when they're released. And don't be selfish. Share this good stuff with a friend or colleague, helping them to go further, faster as well. Till next time, keep rising.